You're listening to Rashkin Report. You're listening to WSUW 91.7 The Edge. This is Yuri Rashkin, and you're listening to Rashkin Report. I'm glad to welcome back to the program Slava Rabinovich, one of our frequent guests and one of the most knowledgeable and listen to perspectives in Russia these days. Slava, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Yuri.
I'd like to start by asking your opinion about Nadezhda Savchenko. She is a Ukrainian fighter who was kind of stolen into Russia, brought into Russia, and on these totally trumped-up charges was convicted and sentenced to, I think, 22 years in Russian jail and prison, and people were expecting her to be traded back to Ukraine from the moment, I think, that she was brought to Russia in the very first time. But nonetheless, it seems like the process worked its way through to her getting convicted, and then supposedly on humanitarian grounds, she was exchanged for two people that maybe were part of Russian military, but according to Russia, were never acknowledged to be such. What are your thoughts about this whole situation?
Yuri, the exchange had nothing to do with humanitarian grounds or with the other side of the exchange. It had everything to do with what is called the Normandy, the four-way meeting, which involves the President of France, the Chancellor of Germany, and the President of Ukraine and the President of Russia. This time around, there was a change in this quartet. There was no President of Ukraine. Just a couple of days prior to the release of Savchenko, or the exchange, if you will, as you say, three leaders of the free world, Hollande, Merkel, and Obama, called Putin in the middle of the night and told him that he'd better pick up the phone. And essentially, they made him to face the fact that the so-called Savchenko list has been drawn up, and it had very, very many line items on that list, maybe dozens, if not 100. But unlike in the Magnitsky Act, or unlike in any other sanctions lists, Putin himself personally was heading up that list as number one line item. And they told him that if he does not release Savchenko within the next 48 hours, this list will come into effect, that major international countries and states are in agreement to effect this legislation and make it Savchenko Act, or whatever it would have been called, with the Savchenko list headed up by the President of Russia. And it has never happened before that he had to face the risk of being on any kind of a sanctions list, not in the Magnitsky Act, not in any other rounds of sanctions, because Western leaders in Western countries were keeping some distance in order to, at least as a headline, to protect the so-called sovereign immunity under which the head of state in their opinion, was falling under, until and unless, of course, some other red lines were crossed. And they actually believed that in this particular case, these lines have been crossed, and not only one but several. That was the kidnapping of a person on a territory of a foreign state. It was a complete mockery of the investigation and due legal process, and a mockery of the court. And they accused him plainly of kidnapping people and trading people. And they told him, Vladimir, that's it. 48 hours, she's back in Kiev, or you're going to head up this Savchenko list personally. And he, of course, did not want that to escalate to that level.
Slava, I would not argue that Putin is looking at things. It certainly makes a lot of sense to explain his actions through personal benefit to him or personal danger to him. But what sources can you kind of point to that where you would get that kind of a high level of information about this kind of a list that would personally point to Putin, and yet this was never publicized because this is, done behind the scenes by diplomats? What I don't want to say proof, but how, what can you tell us about the sources?
Sorry, Yuri, I don't disclose my sources.
Okay, so the situation. So we can either like the story or not like the story, but this is what it is.
Well, why won't you come up with a different theory? You may have some other sources.
Well, there's the official Kremlin story. That doesn't seem very believable or likable, but that seems to. It seems that the definition of reliable sources and reliable news in Russia in general, and these days when the amount of free media is continually on decline, it's harder and harder, and so it seems like, and people are looking for news. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on this media environment then? Where information comes in. You're not a news organization, yet you're considered a very trusted and reliable source by many people. And you're not the only one who actually even said this theory about the Savchenko list. How does information kind of reach people?
You're really looking for an official Kremlin line and watching for whatever appears on the Kremlin.ru website?
No, I usually hear about Peskov's, who is Putin's press secretary, statement. I go, well, that's laughable, but I usually hear it already in the context of somebody who disagrees with him. I certainly don't, it's painful to watch official Kremlin line. It's bad enough to listen to it through commentaries of other people, but it obviously is not very believable. How can people in Russia, get reliable information, or is it not even about reliability? It's just, do you like the information or do you not like the information? Because they have so little control.
People in Russia
Go ahead.
People in Russia at large do not and cannot get reliable information. There is no way for most of the people to get any kind of reliable information. Now, if you tell me that it would have been so much different in the United States of America, where the television skewed towards just one line state propaganda, and you would have told me that that would never be the case, because most people in the U.S. would have turned to the internet to find out the truth. I would have not believed you, because most people get their news from their television sets, regardless whether it's Russia or the US or Europe or any other part of the world. Obviously, there is a certain percentage of the population which gets their information from multiple sources, and of course, including the internet. But most don't. Most people watch television. Now, if you imagine in the US that ABC, NBC, Fox, and everything else, everything that you can think about, whatever you have on the television set, is skewed towards the Goebbels style 1930, 3-1939 Hitler Germany propaganda, and it is controlled by one source of power, in this particular case by the Kremlin. That's exactly what you get in Russia right now, thanks to Putin and his multi-year drive to destroy the mass media and build the system of state propaganda. So there is no way for people at large to actually find anything out.
And I think you're right on there, because from just observing the situation from the outside and just looking at the list of events, not, how they're being interpreted, but just the events themselves, I think it's pretty clear to anybody paying attention that Russia is just marching towards fascism. When you have people being interrogated for tearing down a portrait of Stalin on the street, when you have so-called, informal opposition leaders getting beat up on the street for traveling somewhere where they're not supposed to be traveling. I mean, that to me is marching towards fascism.
That is exactly where Russia is going to, and one would argue that it is already there.
Right.
You're referring to, for example, such instances as a famous poet walking in the underground in the Moscow metro system, the underground system. He saw a portrait of Stalin printed on a color printer, glued to the wall, and he ripped it off the wall, and he was yelled at by some quote-unquote passerby, and this passerby said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm taking down the portrait of a mass murderer." And the next thing that he knew, he was taken by two police officers into a police station, who wanted to find out what he has done. And he was released without a protocol, but the mere fact that this portrait was glued on that wall anyway in the first place is a strange thing to discuss these days. But yet another thing is to discuss how one rips it off and then ends up in a police station.
Well, and in addition to that, the reason that I think the world or anybody, those that are paying attention have found out about this situation is because this passerby, is a famous poet. So the person on the street that tears down Stalin's portrait and gets into trouble, who is not a famous poet, we don't even know about that person. In this case, I think because the person has some stature and standing and is respected artist, we actually find out about this, and people go, well, that seems a little strange, or is it even strange in your opinion, or is this everyday Moscow?
Yeah, it is publicized, and that's exactly why it is publicized, because this person, as you say, is a famous person, and he can do it with the help of social media. But if you shut down social media, for example, that's the next step. If you shut down the internet, that's the next step. You can get to any type of totalitarian regime, and that's what happens in gradually. And in fact, your listeners and you would probably know this, one of the most famous opposition figures, Alexei Navalny. And I had a dinner with him several months ago. Just he and I, one-on-one, we went to one of the restaurants in Moscow. In fact, it's a Scandinavian cuisine restaurant, and many affluent and middle class, kind of upper middle class people go there. It's in the center of Moscow, and once they saw us at the table, many people came over and wanted to take a picture together with us. So it was a very good atmosphere when this kind of people saw us, and we were discussing what would be next stages, next steps of the Russian authorities in this environment, what they have to do in order to continue, keep on clenching into that power. And Alexei told me that he believed that it's the gradual tightening of the screws is what's going to happen, and there is no way around it. And I was in complete agreement with him, and this is exactly what's going on.
Well, that, and I think, how do I say, it seems like from outside it's more obvious maybe than from the inside, because if you're on the inside, obviously, you pay more attention to things and events worldwide. But I think for an average person in Moscow or in Russia, life kind of goes on. You don't realize that something has fundamentally changed, until it's probably too late. But tightening of the screws, I think, is a very important concept. And the screws only get tightened. They only work one way. If they go the other way, they break. And then, so it seems like at least when it comes to Putin's regime, they just know how to tighten. The government shows its power by denying and issuing more decrees, forbidding certain things. It seems like, I guess, to some extent, if we look at this as the, lobster in the boiling water, the water has reached kind of a boiling temperature.
Well, a crocodile cannot back up. It's against the nature. It just doesn't know how to. So that's the nature of the current Russian criminal gang of Putin and his gang. It's a criminal. It's a mafia, and you can't really distinguish and differentiate between Putin and his gang and the state. It's a very unique situation. It's a unique situation in the history of mankind when there is a number of bandits, and it's a real mafia, which took over the state and took over nuclear weapons. That has never happened in the history of the world. And they are going to stay in power, threatening the world, and in fact terrorizing the world until they feel safe. In fact, one of the liberal former members of Putin's cabinet, Alexei Kudrin, who was first deputy prime minister and the minister of finance for many, many years in the early Putin's cabinet, and he was the architect of many quite progressive economic and financial reforms in the early days of Putin's tenure. In the first half of the 2000s, he recently, just several days ago, in fact, I believe on Friday, he tried to convince Putin that Putin has to somehow decrease the level of international tension, of antagonism between Russia and the rest of the world. And he substantiated that argument by saying that Russia needs foreign capital and foreign investment and access to international and Western technology, because Russia is falling behind in its technological advances to such extent that it may be forever. And Putin replied that he's not going to do that because Russia has a 1,000-year-long history, and he will protect Russia's sovereignty not only while he is president, but until his life.
Well, is it because he basically says that Russia is Putin and Putin is Russia? So he kind of identifies himself with the country?
Because of that, and mostly because he is mixing up, or he's doing it on purpose, is mixing up the sovereignty with his being in power. He believes that being in power, particularly his being in power, is Russia's sovereignty. He doesn't understand that Russia falling behind technologically, economically, and financially, that's the lack of sovereignty. And this is basically the end of the story. You can't really do anything about it until and unless you take him out. When I'm saying you take him out, that's Russia taking him out, Russian people taking him out, anyone from outside of Russia taking him out, palace coup d'etat taking him out, Russian street taking him out, anything. But unless that happens, nothing. You're not going to see different storyline.
You're listening to WSUW 91.7 FM, The Edge in Whitewater, Wisconsin. This is Rashkin Report, and I'm your host, Yuri Rashkin. My guest today is Slava Rabinovich, one of the most read and listened to experts on, I guess, things that are going on in Russia these days, because getting news sources is becoming increasingly difficult, and Slava has become quite the authority in the last, I think, 2-3 years that you have really taken to blogging. And kind of, I don't know, do you continue with your financial investment business, or has it been kind of put on back burner with, because you're being so active, in writing and expressing your thoughts? Has that, affected your business? Are you still doing, financial parts of your services, or how did that change?
It's a very good question, Yuri. I spent 20 years of my career attracting foreign investment into Russia and managing this investment. And you can only imagine what happened with foreign investment into Russia over the last 2 years.
I think it went almost literally went to zero.
Yes. And Putin annexed Crimea, and he waged a war in Ukraine, in the eastern part of Ukraine, and this is on top of him waging wars and annexing territories of other states in previous years, such as those of Georgia and Moldova. But what happened within the last 2 years is something extraordinary. And Russia is at odds with basically the rest of the world. And this is not a returning to Cold War. This is something different, which I believe is much more dangerous to the rest of the world. And many people just do not appreciate that. Maybe I can say something more on that topic a bit later. But coming back to your question, whether it affects my business, I have to follow the investment mandate of my investors, and to this end, I have to look for other investment opportunities connected to and related to Russia. And in this particular context, I'm looking to see some very significant market inefficiencies and maybe panic within certain segments of investors who are being stuck with Russian equities and debt. And in particular, I'm looking at debt instruments that have no market efficiency within the segment of so-called non-tradable debt, which is within the asset class of syndicated bank loans, namely Western banks, which were giving foreign currency debt, foreign currency bank loans to the Russian companies. Now they're sitting on approximately $100 billion of this bank loan debt. Some of them are panicking, and they may be looking to sell. There are some investors, maybe within Russia, maybe even which are the very issuers of this debt, that are willing to buy this debt at a very, very, very significant discount.
Right, because you rarely make good deals when you're panicking.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you're on the other end of a transaction, maybe you'll make a lot of money.
Sure.
Right? So this is what I'm looking into and what I'm working on.
Okay.
Um, but otherwise, Putin, of course, and his gang, they destroyed not only the asset management business as we knew it, but all other businesses related to financial services, such as investment banking and sales and trading and corporate finance and mergers and acquisitions and venture capital and angel investing and you name it.
Kind of a really sad situation because there's no money flowing in. And obviously it doesn't flow in because of all the reasons you described. So one of the problems that Russia is facing are these sanctions. And yet the thing that I find absolutely amazing is the extent to what Russian people are refusing to see that the sanctions are there against specific people in their leadership. And instead they've been told that this is like attack on all of Russia, and people kind of believed it, even though these are very specific, targeted sanctions against specific individuals.
Well, you are on one hand partially correct, but on the other hand, you also are undercorrect, if I can say so. When I'm saying that you're partially correct, is that yes, there is a list of individuals which is described as the inner circle of Putin. They're under sanctions. I would have loved to see this list increased manyfold, maybe not even 10 times, but 100 times, maybe 1,000 times. But at the same time, there are many companies that are state-related and Putin-related that are under sanctions, and these sanctions they do affect the Russian population. They do affect the well-being of the Russian public at large because they make Russia completely toxic.
Well, they make Russia toxic. Plus, I would imagine that Putin's inner circle, being a mafia setup, really controls a big chunk of what goes on in the country. So if those people are under sanctions, it does technically affect everybody else downstream.
Yes, and when you and I say that Russia became toxic, Russia became toxic to all of the international investment capital, not only to international and foreign investors, but also, of course, to Russian investors. And the capital flight and the amount of money that is flowing out of Russia, all this money that could have been and would have been available for the investment in Russia, it's all gone. So it's not only the likes of, Fidelity and other big worldwide investors, but we're talking about Russian capital, which is huge and is flowing out of Russia.
So we're really talking about two streams of money that is going out of Russia. First, it is the international investors that are pulling their money out, and the second one is the Russian elite that is putting its stolen money out in the Western investment funds as well, because they don't want to keep the money in Russia where they know it's unsafe.
That's correct, but also there is another set of sanctions. And when you were asking your question, you did not even mention the a different type of sanctions, which is called so-called anti-sanctions. Anti-sanctions were administered to the Russian public by the Russian government. These sanctions are designed to be in a so-called retaliation to the Western sanctions, and they involve an embargo for Western goods and mainly products, and mainly food, to be imported into Russia from all countries that participated in anti-Russian sanctions in the first place. So we do not get Dutch tomatoes. We don't get Spanish strawberries. We don't get French cheese. We don't get Parmesan. We don't get, you name it. Basically, there is a concrete wall in terms of the food imports into Russia because of these so-called anti-sanctions. And when you asked me that Russian public doesn't know how these sanctions affect them, I also am adding to this equation a complete lack of knowledge of the Russian public that most of the so-called sanctions come onto the heads of the Russian public, not from anybody but the Russian government. This is an unheard of situation where Russian people are sanctioned by their own government.
And that's been the case now for 2 years, and Prime Minister Medvedev just announced that, or he was told that he needs to review this for the next, year and a half of these. Once again, how can Russian public not find, not hold the government responsible? And inevitably they will, and that's where the revolutions and all revolts and all of those, things that change course of history from down up occur. But so far all is quiet. Like you said, there's less choice of food, but people seem to be willing to suffer.
It's also another very good question, Yuri. And 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I was much more optimistic about all those words, such as revolt. But I don't see any revolt. I just see people just swallowing this bitter pill and saying that we have never lived worse than under Obama. That's what they say in Russia.
Right. Well, which is a joke because obviously Obama, it's right. It's okay. Slava, people in America tend to have a rather positive view of Mr. Putin. And I think one of the things you said that you wanted to address that I think is very important to address, that's they appreciate the danger factor. That people in America tend to kind of look at Putin and go, well, he's strong, he is anti-American, but that's okay. And he stands for Russian people and those kinds of, I guess I would say nonsense, but it's out there. And then people kind of look at the fact that Mr. Trump and Putin seem to have some kind of a weird relationship, and that plays into, electoral politics that we here in the United States are affected by and are living through. How do you suggest people in America evaluate the situation in Russia so that they can come to their own conclusions about what is really going on, and to what extent is Mr. Putin somebody that America should be friendly with or not?
Well, I don't know exactly which American people you're referring to when you're saying that many people have favorable.
I'm referring to
Putin,
kind of a blue collar workers that don't pay too much attention to what's going on in the world in general, but for some reason the image of Mr. Putin that they have is not altogether negative.
Right. Well, again, this is maybe some kind of a average within any particular small set of statistic, but
I won't reveal my sources.
I can only say that, first of all, we all know what kind of propaganda Kremlin supports with with billions of dollars a year to do exactly what you just described in order to brainwash people in the US and in other countries. There have been several even mainstream publications in the Western media describing all of that stuff, how it is done, what are the techniques, what are the publications and tools, and how it is achieved in terms of paid for articles and so on and so forth, how the so-called troll factory in St. Petersburg is operating, how it is involved in cyber terrorism inside Russia, outside of Russia, and in fact in the US. This is a serious operation. This is done by former officers of KGB that are in charge of Russia today. They know how to do that stuff. And when you're saying whatever you're saying and describing many people's views, they all fall victim of all these processes. All they have to do is to also try to dissect the information and somehow lead themselves to reliable sources. Otherwise, they fall victim to what I just said.
Slava, then perhaps let's put it in terms that people can relate to and understand. In your opinion, would Vladimir Putin prefer Donald Trump in charge running the United States, or Hillary Clinton, or Senator Bernie Sanders?
Well, Putin and his advisors, they are very far out in terms of understanding how the world works, including the US. I believe they really want Donald Trump to become the next president. And this is because they believe that the US will be so much destabilized by this kind of a president that would be a very beneficial situation for Putin and his gang to do what they want to do. At the same time, Trump's comments that he can find common ground with Putin, of course, doesn't help in explaining how this view is wrong. But yet, at the same time, when Russian warplanes come to several feet away from a mast of American military warship, and when that comes to light, Donald Trump says we should have shut them down. Then the Kremlin says, wait a second, this doesn't seem right. He just said that he can find a common ground with Putin. And all of a sudden, he says this kind of stuff. What happens? They just don't understand that the U.S. Have the institution of division of power. They don't understand that it's all about institutions and due processes that the U.S. have, and regardless of who is the next president, you can't really have some kind of a agreement between the head of state in the U.S. and a complete criminal thug somewhere in a different part of the world, albeit this part of the world is 1/8 of the world landmass. I mean, you are overestimating what these people in the Kremlin understand and how the brain work.
Although it would certainly seem to play within the kind of the language and the picture and framing that Donald Trump is promoting, which is that he alone has tremendous amount of power and influence, including being able to work one-on-one with with people like Putin, even though in reality there's Congress and there's other checks and balances really involved.
Right, but regardless of what who says what today, it doesn't really matter. You're gonna tell me that in 1 year from now, with a new U.S. president, there will be a different kind of relationship between the next U.S. president, whoever that is, and Putin. I think that if anything, it's going to be worse.
Right.
If Putin's behavior is going to continue along the same lines. What are you going to do with Boeing flight MH17 that went down in eastern Ukraine on the 17th of July of 2014? What are you going to do with Russia's veto on attempted resolution of the Security Council of the United Nations to create a UN tribunal for that downing of the plane? What are you going to do with multinational report, the second report on the downing of this plane? The first one described how the plane went down. The second one will describe who actually took it down, including the entire chain of command, leading all the way to the commander-in-chief, to Mr. Putin. What are you going to do about that? It doesn't really matter who is the next president in regards to this particular issue of downed MH17, or it's going to be along the same lines as the albeit multi-year, but still Gaddafi type of a saga, and maybe Gaddafi type of an end.
Slava, in conclusion for this conversation, your thoughts on both how long do you currently give this regime before it just bursts like a bubble, or how at the same time do you view your own personal safety remaining in Moscow during these times?
These questions, they don't have a definitive answer, unfortunately. The reason why they don't have it is that Putin, for the last 16 years, gradually but surely destroyed the Russian state. He destroyed a Russian constitution, and he destroyed the institution of division of power. He destroyed the institution of elections, and he destroyed the institution of change of power. And in the absence of the institution of elections and institution of changing of power, you can't really predict what is going to happen and when it's going to happen. And this is one of the major tragedies, if you will, of the current generation of Russians, is that not only they don't know what is going to happen with the next 10 years, 20 years, or 5 years even, but they don't know what's going to happen in 1 year or in 1 month. And you can only imagine what the international investors are thinking at the moment, because international investors, when they evaluate their investment in any type in any type of a part of the world, they evaluate their potential reward in exchange for a calculated risk, and they would like also to know their time horizon, and they would also like to know their exit strategy. Given all that, there is not a single line item which is visible. It's all fogged up. And so not only your question is impossible to answer, many very risk non-averse, risk-liking investors have no answer to your questions, unfortunately. So we just, I don't know, we just don't know, and not because we are afraid to make predictions or just silly enough, and not being able to analyze. It is impossible to say. It's impossible to predict. That's what Putin did to Russia, and he obviously will be included into history textbooks as the person who destroyed Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union.
Slava Rabinovich, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you, Yuri.
You're listening to 91.7 FM, WSUW, in Whitewater, Wisconsin. You're listening to Rashkin Report.